It's another time. We would use the twin to renew the ritual covenant.
I had been waiting for this moment ever since my twin sister died. I had waited for the day Dr. Victor Malunga would finally confess to all his evil deeds. As an ardent fan of Nigerian movies, I often watched the part where Nemesis caught up with the wicked, forcing them to confess their crimes to anyone who cared to listen. That was exactly what happened with Dr. Malunga. He was the one responsible for my sister's untimely death. You see, the world we live in is mysterious. There are a lot of bad people disguised as good people. Real wolves in sheep's clothing. They hide under noble professions, yet they are worse than criminals. But this is not just about uncovering a dark secret. No, this is far worse than any sinister news you have ever heard. My name is Zinle Mathembu, and I was born a twin. My sister's name was Zandila. We were inseparable, until death came and built a boundary between us. If it had been a natural death, maybe I would have found the strength to endure it. But this was far from natural. Zandila and I were more than sisters. We were best friends, best colleagues, best partners. We were everything to each other. I lived in her world as much as she lived in mine. We did everything together. We dressed alike, walked alike, made decisions together, and even shared similar dreams. Zandila was a kind and beautiful soul. She loved peace and would rather give up anything just to avoid conflict. She hardly fought for anything for long. Whenever things got difficult, she would simply say, "I leave it to God to decide." Sometimes, I wonder why good people die too soon. Then came that morning. The morning that changed everything.
Before we begin, I want you to do something very important. If you believe in the power of testimony, hit the like button right now. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Trust me, you won't regret it. This is not just another story. It's a chilling, real-life testimony of darkness, deception, and divine justice. What you're about to hear will shake you to your core and open your eyes to the battles happening beyond what we can see. But more importantly, it will remind you of one unshakable truth. God is real, and his power is greater than any force of darkness. Stay with us to the very end, because this story is not just to be heard. It's a warning, a lesson, and a call to faith.
Zandila woke up feeling sick. She was weak, nauseous, and couldn't even leave her bed. At first, we suspected it was just malaria, typhoid, or some minor infection. Mom suggested we get her some drugs from the pharmacy. She took them for almost 3 days, yet there was no improvement. That was when I started to panic. I told my parents that we needed to take her to the hospital, just to be safe. They agreed. We were only 22 years old and had never been the sickly type. This was unusual. We thought of taking her to the government hospital, but we needed a doctor that would give her full medical attention. This would be the first time my sister would be admitted to any hospital, as we hardly fall sick. Just a mere headache, cough, etc. Our neighbor, Mrs. Madiba, recommended Horizon Medical Center, a big and expensive hospital on the outskirts of town. According to her, that was where she had taken her sick daughter, and within 2 days, she was back on her feet. We wanted something of that nature for my sister. I can't wait for her to get out of bed and twin with me again. So, when I told Dad and Mom about the hospital, even though it was expensive, they agreed immediately. So off we went to Horizon Medical Center, our hearts a little heavy with worry, yet clinging to hope as we made our way there. We bought the hospital card without delay, and since Zandila was continuously vomiting, really, it just wouldn't stop. She was admitted to the emergency section immediately. Not long after, the nurses had to call the doctor, and that was when we first met Dr. Victor Malunga. He was polished, confident, and good-looking, the kind of doctor whose presence alone reassured you that despite all, everything was going to be fine. He took a closer look at my sister, and with a gentle but curious tone, asked, "Are you twins?" Mummy nodded and replied, "Yes, they are." With a slight smile, he added, "No wonder the striking resemblance," as if he were marveling at the similarity between us. Then, he carefully placed his stethoscope on her chest, checked her pulse, and examined her eyes with deliberate precision. "She'll be fine," he assured us confidently, before instructing the nurses to take her blood, urine, and stool samples for testing. But we never got to see the test results that day. They simply told us that they would be ready the next day. Before leaving for the day, Dr. Malunga stopped by once more and said, "She'll need to remain on admission so we can monitor her overnight." Mummy agreed with his plan, but she insisted that I stay behind with her, just in case. So, we bought some food, gave her the prescribed medication as instructed, and settled in for the night, completely unaware that our nightmare was just beginning. I remember that night vividly. It was exactly 12 a.m. when my sister Zandile suddenly woke up from sleep, screaming, panting, and pointing at something on the wall as if it held a terrible secret. I jumped up in panic, trying desperately to calm her down. Instinctively, I began to pray, clinging to every bit of hope that I could muster, and as I did, she started to regain herself. Her breathing steadied slowly, and finally she whispered, "Let me tell you what I saw." She began to narrate the dream in a soft, trembling voice. "Touch me right here on the leg." The man in the dream beckoned to her, his tone both commanding and strange. She looked down and saw a terrible wound, flesh decaying, pus oozing out in a slow, almost unbearable trickle. The sight of it made her stomach turn, and for a long, lingering moment, it felt as though time itself had come to a halt. Every detail of that gruesome vision was seared into her memory, and she could not help but shudder at the thought of it. "I don't know who he was, Zinle," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. But something about him terrified me beyond measure. I refused to even consider touching his wound, and suddenly, as if things could not get any worse, he attacked me without any warning. We fought, and just as he was about to overpower me completely, I woke up in a state of sheer panic. She paused for what seemed like an eternity, her eyes wide with a raw, unfiltered fear that was almost too much to bear. The memory of that dream still haunted her, as vivid as if it were happening all over again. "The moment I opened my eyes," she continued in a hushed tone that trembled on the edge of a whisper, "I heard a strange sound, the shrill cry of a bird flying past the window. It was as if that sound was a signal, a warning from somewhere beyond our understanding. I turned to look at the clock. It was exactly midnight, a time that has always been associated with mystery and fear." I tried to reassure her, my voice gentle yet strained as I said, "It's just a bad dream, Zandile. Nothing more than an overactive mind playing tricks on you in the darkness." But deep inside, even I felt a sense of unease, as though there was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of our shared experience. That night was one of those nights when the boundary between reality and dreams seems to blur. I had my own strange dreams as well, dreams that I couldn't quite understand or put into words. As I hesitantly shared my own unsettling visions with her, she suddenly stiffened and, with a look of pure terror in her eyes, whispered, "Something held me down while I was sleeping. I couldn't move at all, but I was fully conscious, completely aware of every little detail. I think we are under a spiritual attack, something beyond our control or understanding." The moment she said those words, I felt a heavy weight press down on my head, as if the very air had become thick with dread. A strange force gripped me tightly, and in an instant I found myself screaming uncontrollably, unable to stop the outburst that came from deep within my soul. At that time, I wasn't deeply spiritual. I didn't think to pray fervently, or to utter any strong words of exorcism to drive away whatever it was that hovered ominously over us. In our confusion and fear, we simply went back to sleep, hoping that the terror would eventually fade with the breaking of dawn, that the night's horrors were nothing more than fleeting nightmares. But the next morning brought a harsh and bitter reality. Zandil fell terribly ill. The vibrant energy that once defined her seemed to vanish as she could no longer move her legs. In a desperate rush, she was taken to the hospital, where the frantic pace of doctors and nurses filled the air with urgency. Yet despite several tests, the doctors found nothing that could explain her sudden condition. Weeks passed slowly, each day feeling like an eternity as she got worse and worse. At night, she would wake up screaming, her cries echoing through the halls of the hospital and disturbing everyone around her. The doctors dismissed it all as hallucinations, attributing her screams to stress or medication side effects. But deep inside, I knew better than to accept their easy explanations. One night, when the pain and fear had become almost unbearable, I had had enough. She was suffering terribly, and I couldn't watch it any longer. Despite the stern advice from the doctors, I took her home, determined to find some way to help her. That night, for the first time in what felt like endless weeks, she slept peacefully. And for a brief moment, we allowed ourselves to hope that perhaps things might get better. However, our mother was not convinced. Insisting that she return to the hospital for a thorough checkup, she made sure that we did not have the option to keep her at home. 2 days later, we reluctantly went back, knowing that sometimes, despite our best wishes, we must face the hard truths of medical care. That was when Dr. Victor lost his temper with me. In a heated confrontation, he scolded me for taking Zandiel home, insisting that I had endangered her well-being. With an authority that left little room for argument, he convinced my parents that she needed to stay in the hospital for proper medical care, a phrase that now echoed in my mind as a bitter reminder of all that had gone wrong. I protested, but they listened to him, dismissing my desperate pleas as if they were nothing more than idle murmurs in the wind. That night, I stayed with her in the hospital, determined to be by her side no matter how frightening or uncertain the future might be. She clutched my hand tightly, her small fingers trembling with fear, and in that silent grip, I felt both the warmth of her trust and the cold chill of impending doom. Neither of us knew in that moment that it would be her last night on this earth. I dozed off for a bit, the sterile hum of the hospital machines lulling me into a troubled sleep, when suddenly I heard a voice whisper, soft, yet filled with an otherworldly urgency. "Let her go, or you will go with her." The words echoed through the stillness of the night, chilling me to the core. I jolted awake, heart pounding fiercely as if it were trying to break free from my chest. In that frantic moment, I saw that Zandiel was choking, her face contorted in pain as she struggled to breathe. Panic seized me. I ran out of the room, screaming for help with a desperation I had never known before. Nurses rushed in, their expressions a mix of alarm and urgency, but despite their frantic efforts, it was too late. She died in my arms, her final moments slipping away like a fading whisper in a storm. I wailed uncontrollably, my grief uncontained as I begged God, pleading for some explanation, asking him why such sorrow had been allowed to befall us. The only thing Dr. Victor said, his voice as calm and detached as ever, was, "We did our best, but God knows best. Lies." I knew it was all lies, empty words meant to soothe the minds of those who could not grasp the true horror of what had transpired. We buried Zandiel, and for a while I convinced myself that was the end of my pain, that the agony would eventually fade like a distant memory. But 2 weeks later, an unsettling change began to occur. She started to appear in my dreams, night after night, a spectral presence that I could neither escape nor ignore. Every night, without fail, she came to me in my sleep, her form emerging from the shadows. She would open her mouth as if to say something, a message, a warning, or perhaps an appeal. But before she could speak any clear words, I would wake up, screaming, heart racing in terror and disbelief. It kept happening, over and over, a relentless cycle that left me exhausted and emotionally shattered. I told my mother about these dreams, hoping that she might understand or help ease my torment, and she took me to church. There, in the soft, reverent light of that sanctuary, I was given psalms to pray, a list of sacred words meant to bring solace and to offer a means of rebuking any spirit that was not of God. I clutched those psalms as if they were a lifeline, a fragile hope that I could somehow fight back against the terror that haunted my nights. That night, I dreamt again. But this time, something was different. This time, Zandiel spoke. Her voice, faint yet unmistakably clear, broke through the veil of my slumber. In that moment, as she finally uttered words that I had longed to hear, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I listened intently, caught between the comfort of hearing her voice and the unbearable pain of knowing that she was no longer with me in the world of the living. Zinle? He killed me. I froze, my body rigid with shock and disbelief. The chilling words echoed in my ears like a death knell. Who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Dr. Malunga Victor, came the haunting reply, each syllable laced with bitterness and despair. He killed me. My blood is crying out. My blood is restless. The agony in that spectral confession was palpable, stirring emotions I had long tried to bury deep within. I woke up in shock, my heart pounding and my mind racing with the terrible implications of those words. Determined to find answers and driven by a desperate need for justice, I began investigating him. With the help of a sympathetic nurse, who, like me, had sensed something was terribly wrong, I started poring over the hospital's records. Page after page, I saw a disturbing pattern unfold before my eyes. It became clear that people were dying mysteriously and always under the same eerie circumstances. Patients would show signs of improvement, small, hopeful indicators that they might recover. But then, without warning, they would suddenly die. The records seemed to dismiss these deaths as the natural course of terminal illnesses. They only noted patients as terminally ill, elderly, or victims of accidents. No one questioned the deaths. No one dared to look beyond the surface. After all, doctors are not God, they say. Sick people die. But something about these cases felt different. It wasn't just that the patients were ill. They were being sacrificed, as if a dark, hidden hand was choosing who would live and who would be doomed to die. The thought sent shivers down my spine, and I knew I had stumbled onto something sinister. I tried to warn my parents to share with them the disturbing findings of my investigation, but they never believed me. Their eyes were filled with confusion and concern, so they dismissed my words as the ramblings of a heart broken by loss. And then, as if fate were determined to punish my pursuit of the truth, the Brotherhood came after me. I suddenly fell sick, worse than I had ever been before. Me, who was never used to sickness. Just like my sister's case, my body, once strong and resilient, now felt fragile and weak. My mom got worried with all her maternal instinct and wanted to take me to that same hospital to seek help from the very place that had become the source of my torment. I refused. I couldn't bear the thought of returning to that cursed place. One day, while returning from an appointment with another doctor, we finally scheduled an appointment with at New Hope's hospital. We passed by our church. From within, I could hear the soft murmur of prayers rising. There was something deeply soothing yet haunting about those prayers that stirred an inexplicable urge in me to enter. I wanted to enter because something in me says, "This is where your salvation lies." But my mother was really exhausted and worn from her own struggles, so I held back. I will make inquiries about where those prayer groups are and join them someday. That was what I resolved to do. So when I got home and lay on the bed, I sent my dear friend Joy to inquire about the prayer meetings. She returned with information that offered a glimmer of hope in my darkened world. There were vigils held every third Friday of the month by the same prayer group. I was happy to hear this, so I planned to attend. I waited for that Friday with a mix of hope and nervous anticipation, counting down the days until it arrived. When the day finally came, I begged my mother to take me there. I needed to be in that sacred space, to feel the power of prayer, and maybe find a little relief from the pain that had weighed me down. She agreed. Mom smiled gently at me and hugged me softly. Later that evening, she dropped me off at the church. When I got into the church, I was so weak that I could barely stand. My legs felt like they were made of jelly, and every step seemed like a huge effort. I sat on the cold bench near the entrance, feeling both exhausted and desperate for a little strength. I could still hear the distant murmur of prayers and the soft shuffling of feet. I was grateful they were having a meeting that day. I drew closer to see them. Soon the prayer procession began, and everyone around me started walking slowly in prayer. They moved in a steady, determined rhythm. Many of them were praying in tongues. A sister told me to sit put and pray where I am, since she noticed I was very weak. I longed to join them, to feel that sense of unity and hope, but my body refused to cooperate that day. I couldn't even stand properly, and all I could do was watch as the congregation moved gracefully around the church. Then, out of the stillness of that quiet night, I heard a gentle voice whisper, "Go." The sound was soft but clear, as if it came from right inside my heart. I sat there, frozen, unsure of what to do or whether I even heard properly. I have never heard God before. I hesitated for a long moment, my mind swirling with doubt and fear. And then I heard it again. Another part of that mysterious voice saying, "Even if you fall, let it be in the presence of God." Those words were like a warm hand on my shoulder, urging me to try, even if I was afraid. The voice reminded me that I was not alone, that God was with me, even in my weakness. It was as if energy stemmed from within me, summoning every bit of courage I had left. That was how I took my first small step forward. My leg wobbled, and I almost fell, but I managed to steady myself. I took another step, and then another, each one a little stronger than the last. Before I knew it, I was walking on my own, slowly but surely, moving with a determination that surprised even me. Tears began to stream down my face, not just tears of sorrow, but of relief and joy. Those tears washed away some of the pain that had haunted me for so long. By the time the vigil ended, I was completely healed. It wasn't just my body that had been mended, my heart and soul felt lighter too. I experienced a transformation I had never thought possible. From that day forward, I dedicated my life to God, vowing to honor the healing I had received and to help others find the same light in their darkest hours. Soon I recovered perfectly, started schooling, and my sister no longer appeared in my dreams for some time. One day, I opened my dad's newspaper to learn that Dr. Malunga Victor, yes, the same man who had once haunted our lives, had fallen terribly sick. They said he had diabetes and that a nasty wound had developed on his leg. The news hit me hard, stirring up memories and emotions I had long tried to bury. I remembered all too vividly Zandiel's dream, the one where he begged her to touch his leg. The haunting words and images from that dream came flooding back, merging with the present in a way that felt all too real. They said that before he died, he had made a confession that revealed he was not just an ordinary doctor, but something very dangerous and evil. He was a satanic agent, a cold, calculated man who belonged to a cult called Majiji. Every month, the cult sacrificed a soul to keep their wealth and health intact. This word is the confession he made in church as he ran to meet a reverend father when the blood of my sister and those other people he killed chased after him. I still remember how it all started to unfold in our lives. When Zandiel was admitted to the hospital, there were very few patients around. It was as if time was running out for him, and in that moment of desperation, he chose her as his next target. I can hardly believe that he would decide on such a cruel fate. Such an evil man. He had killed so many before, leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. His actions were not random. They were part of a dark ritual he followed with blind faith in his master, the devil. When he realized that his own life was fading and that death was closing in on him, he ran to a church, begging for mercy, as if prayers could wash away all the evil he had done. That's how the newspaper described it. He suddenly woke up one morning from his sickbed. I heard Dr. Malunga on that fateful day, he has no peace, ran to the Reverend Father Gabriel for help, as he told his wife to drive him down to church. They said the priest was conducting a morning mass when he ran in asking God to forgive him, that the souls of those he had killed were after his life. He began to make open confessions about the brotherhood called Majiji. He said they worshipped Satan and each person had to make human sacrifices monthly to live and maintain the status quo. He said he kept killing people, even without them knowing. What he does is send the demon in charge of death to come pick a selected soul. Unfortunately, there weren't many sick patients admitted to the hospital when my sister came, and since he had a few days to live, he decided to use her. He mentioned the caliber of people he had used in times past. Some were very sick, and he had to take their lives so that no one would know. Some old people, because the family would be able to endure their death. I heard the Reverend Father tried to lead him to Christ, but told him firstly he had to give up everything he got from Satan. But Dr. Malunga refused this one. Dr. Malunga left the hospital knowing he had broken the Brotherhood code, but greed wouldn't let him seek solace in Jesus. The Brotherhood was also after him. Soon we heard he sold his house, even before the authorities could get to him, and tried to disappear. Rumor has it that he slumped immediately at the airport. Finally, he died in the hospital a few days later. Since then, My parents never doubted my spirit of discernment. Since that day, my parents never doubted me again. They finally saw that I had been telling the truth about the evil that had lurked in our midst. Now Zendil is finally at rest. I feel a deep, bittersweet peace, knowing that she is free from the pain and terror that marked her final days. Her gentle spirit, once marred by the cruelty of this satanic agent, now lives on in a place of calm and light. Though I miss her every single day, the thought that she is at peace brings me a small measure of comfort. One day, I know I will see her again. I hold on to that promise like a small light in the darkness of my grief. Until that day comes, I will continue to share this testimony, hoping that it will remind others that even in our darkest moments, the truth will shine through. I believe that love and light will eventually overcome all the evil in this world. My journey continues, carrying the memory of Zendil with me, and I have faith that our reunion is only a matter of time.
You've heard the testimony. You've seen the power of God at work. Now the question is, where do you stand? Will you choose to walk in the light, or will you ignore this and keep living as if none of these matters? It's okay if you don't subscribe, but maybe it's because you're not ready to stand for Jesus yet. Maybe you're afraid to openly declare your faith, and that's fine. Jesus won't force you. But remember what he said in Matthew 10:33, "Whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father in heaven." So before you leave, I want you to do two things. First, type Jesus is Lord in the comments if you stand with him. Second, share this video because someone out there needs to hear this testimony before it's too late. And if you have a testimony of your own, don't keep it to yourself. Drop it in the comments. You never know whose faith you might ignite. May the Lord be with you all. See you in the next video.